Shalom, this is Hakam Yar ben-Emmett again with another exciting topic of interest series edition hosted by none other than my personal company, the Torah Watchman Show International, LLC, non-for-profit 501c3 company, registered to the federal government. Yes. I have a video here that's it's all about singing on Passover. Haggadah that my family has read for years. Um, it's the Shia version, I believe. I see here. Yeah, the Shia edition here, if you can see this, it may be backwards, but this was a similar edition that my wife's grandfather, blessed memory, used to read. And it's built for Chabadniks and Ashkenazi audiences. The song is Dayenu. If you're a Christian, a B'nai Noach, you probably have never heard the song before. And it's probably one of the most popular songs sung by young and old. Children love it. Sung on Passover, especially the first 2 days and maybe the last day of Passover. We refer to that as the high point of the high holidays, or the Hag, as they call it. Dayenu is not really a contemporary song because it goes back to about the 9th century. And we still, to this day, we don't know who wrote it. The first Haggadah that it was actually compiled in, and I'll show you a picture of it, of this Haggadah in a few minutes, was actually canonized at approximately the 10th century. Now, I want to get into some of the verses here. Now, until I really learned Hebrew through and through and understood what it meant, understanding any language, especially foreign language, okay? I was born with an English silver spoon in my mouth and not a Hebrew silver spoon. And when my wife and I and family had to learn the hard way, okay? Just through being acclimated to it and through osmosis and listening to Barry Weber and Benny Friedman and Ari Goldwag and other people singing the songs. And we learned Hebrew by this way. I have Hebrew playing in my garage even. But this is how you learn Hebrew, but Hebrew is best understood if you understand the context. So if you're doing research on ancient literature, per se, okay, poems, poetry, and things of this nature, songs, most poems actually could be put to music. All of Hebrew is to be sung. Even reading a Torah Parsha, the Hakam or the rabbi, whoever is called to the beam of the read from the Torah, even the Haftarahs, is done in a singing melody fashion. Because of strophes and things like this and special markings in the Hebrew as a guide, as these are helping tools for a person to know how to read it correctly. And they learn this, but just by, through using it for years and decades, because Jews are taught this and Cheder and yeshivas and things of the like, and it's a natural language for them. But getting back to Dayenu in the 10th century, now I want you to go back in time. I know we live in the 21st century. I know we have Zoom, we have technology and things of this nature. We take a lot of things for granted because the things are so automatically rendered for us, like artificial intelligence. I have artificial intelligence throughout my house. I had to convince myself as an IT expert that it's friendly. Okay, but what I'm saying is, when you sing Dayenu in the 21st century, but do you really understand the context that was written? The song was intended by whoever the author was. In fact, when it was canonized in the 10th century, to be handed down for all future generations, and it has been. It's part of is enshrined in Jewish tradition. It's actually one of those hallmarks of being Jewish. Okay, I love singing. I love hearing Hebrew music. My wife loves music. My daughter loves music, and I encourage this. Best way to learn a language, the best foreign language, is to sing it. Now, I'm going to read some of these verses for you, and I'm going to ask you what your opinion is after I read each one. I believe I have about 10 verses here, and I'm going to read in English so that everyone can understand what I'm saying. Again, the first verse, it says, if he, which is God, had brought us out from Egypt, the Passover story, after the 10 plagues and everything else, we had a small Passover meal there with the pakal lamb. The blood was spilled and painted on the doorposts and things like that. After the Jews were liberated, it was it's huge celebratory event. But it says here, it's yin and yang kind of thing, positive and negative. So it addresses the miracles of God. It addresses us coming out of Egypt, and there's history here too. In fact, so the analysts or the rabbis or Torah scholars that have explored the origins of Dayenu, they think it's actually maybe dated back to the destruction of the temple. Who knows? But what we do know is that the author, whoever wrote it, we have evidence per se of the 9th to 10th century. So again, if he had brought us out of Egypt and he had not carried out judgments against them, we're talking about 10 gods, 10 plagues, 10 major demonic entities. We're talking about necromancy, speaking to the dead and things of this nature. Pharaoh had his own priest that worshiped and conducted all kinds of magic and ritualistic things in that time. But it says right here, God sent Moses to Egypt to liberate his people completely. And God had every intention in his mind and heart to defeat the gods of Egypt. But it says right here that if God did not carry out the judgment against the gods, how could the Jews be liberated? Because judging these gods of Egypt, and Pharaoh put all his hopes in, bent him over, loosened his hardening of his heart, and he said, you may leave now and take all the gold and wealth from Egypt with you. But it says at the end, it would have sufficed us. It would be okay if we just got half of what, say, God had promised us, but God did not carry out his promise to the nth degree, and we're stuck there in a gap there in risk management, all this. He said, we're dealing with the aftermath, right? This is what Dayenu means. It would have sufficed for us. And in other words, it's okay. It's enough. The second verse, if he had carried out judgments against them and not against their idols, Dayenu, it would have sufficed us. This is a lot like the gods and idols is about the same thing, okay? Stone statues and things like that. Christians don't know this, but, so-called pakal lamb that they compare Jesus to, what actually, it was a goat, a ram was a sacred god, an entity that the Egyptians worshiped, and they actually sacrificed to that, okay? The third verse, if he had destroyed their idols, but he had not smitten their firstborn, remember the 10th plague was the plague of death. We don't know if that was Satan or the angel Gabriel. Anyway, a death angel per se, Moloch, came into at night, very nightmarish scene where he struck down dead the firstborn of every animal, of every Egyptian slave. Even Pharaoh's son was stricken down too, the firstborn of that. Why was God using that kind of horrific judgment on the 10th plague that is defined with that? Why? Because when Michelle was born, the Pharaoh of that time was hunting down all the firstborn of the Jewish boys and trying to execute them, and he did execute a lot of them. And Moses got away to his beloved sister Miriam. But again, we say it's good enough, it sufficed us, that if God did not actually carry out his promise in the 10th plague. So the 10th plague was not the 10th plague. According to the author of this song, and we're seeing this ad nauseum, it sufficed us. It sufficed us. It's good enough that if God promised us the sun and moon and stars and sent Moses all this trouble to go to Egypt and tell the Jewish people, you're going to be set free. But, there were some points when even Moses built on his faith, the Jewish people were so hard in their hearts, they wanted to stone Moses because they didn't believe what they were seeing, because Pharaoh was making the life even harder. You know the story. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Another verse, it says, if he had smitten their firstborn, but he had not given us the wealth of Egypt. In other words, okay, the firstborn, the 10th plague did happen. But, in the Torah, it's very clear He told Moses, you tell those women, you tell those nursemaids and birthing women, those women that, okay, I told you to go and you can take all the gold away from the Egyptian wives, but now you cannot, but it's sufficient for us. We're dealt with that something halfway blessing, a halfway promise, folks. Just like there's no such thing as a half lie or a white lie, it's a whole lie or a whole truth. Okay. So moving on, the next verse. If he had given us their wealth, but he had not split the sea for us. Okay. So we have the gold, we have the booty, we have the wealth, we have the diamonds and rubies and all of this stuff. We have the wealth of Egypt and our donkey carts and all of this. But then if God did not keep his promise to Moses, he said, Moses raised his staff against the Red Sea. And then God breathed from his nostrils and opened up the sea, as some people believe 300 feet high on either end, so that dry ground, a day later they could walk across. Well, if this didn't happen, we would be stuck there on the other side of the Red Sea, facing imminent death and destruction by the Egyptian army that was closing in on our heels. But that's good enough, right? If he had taken us through the sea on dry land, but he had not drowned our oppressors, how would the witness of God been raised up before all these polytheistic Gentile nations if Egyptians' armies were not decimated? In other words, Pharaoh was getting to a point where he was beginning to believe there was actually a supernatural presence that was doing all these miracles and everything on behalf of Moses and Aaron. He actually believed that. And the people of Egypt were losing faith in their gods, in their idols and things of this nature. You can imagine why he could have mustered another army. He could have found a roundabout way to come and conquer Israel later on. And instead, the miracle of that is that not only was the Red Sea parted, the strongest army in the Levant, in the Middle East at that time, the Egyptian army, was decimated, completely decimated down to the last soldier. That's the truth. And that's the miracle. And that's the witness before everyone else. Think about the witnesses here. You see a God that goes into the plan, I promise you the sun and moon and stars, then only meet you halfway to the end. What would the Western world say about this? Just use your imagination. Again, this is a 10th century mentality here. Okay? So, if he had supplied our needs in the desert for 40 years, like manna and quail, but he not fed us manna, what are the needs? If you're in the desert on the burning, scorching sands of the Sinai wilderness there, it's the wilderness of Zen. I've been in Saudi Arabia, it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes in the shade. You open your mouth and you're dehydrated instantly just from the hot air and the desert wind and dust storms and things of this nature. How would you eat? So, he carried us out, he liberated us from Egypt, destroyed the armies, only brought us out in the desert to die because we had no food and no water. Just think about this, okay? If he had fed us manna, but had not given us Shabbat, in other words, the seventh day. But folks, without the seventh day, we would not have that timekeeping device to know the incremental days of each week is 7 days a week, and know the holidays and things in our Hebrew calendar. And Shabbat was not really emphasized in the very beginning in Egypt. It was Rosh Chodesh, it was a Pesach, in the holy month of Nisan, the head of all months, the Jewish New Year. The true Rosh Hashanah was in the month of Nisan. I don't want to get down in more detail with that. But essentially, just think about if we didn't have Shabbat, where would we be? The commandment of Shabbat, where would it be? Just think about that. Why have a temple if there's no Shabbat? Okay? So, if he had brought us before Mount Sinai and had not given us the Torah, it's okay. It would have sufficed us. It's enough. Really? Why would God bring us before Mount Sinai and not give us the Torah and all the promises, why did God take us out in the desert of Mount Sinai in the first place? If it wasn't to reveal himself to 2 million or more souls there and say, I am the God who defeated the Egyptian army. I'm the God who liberated you from captivity and slavery and bondage for hundreds of years. To go to the mountain. Well, imagine Moses going up to the mountain and coming back with nothing in his hand. I don't have anything. I'm sorry. God changed his mind. No Torah. But it sufficed us. It gets further. And the last one here is that if he had given us the Torah and had not brought us into the land of Israel, Dayenu, it would have sufficed us. Now think about that. The Torah was all about the journey we need to embark, keeping the 613 mitzvah, readying ourselves. God did not want to build the nation of Israel and the wilderness of Sinai. He wanted to build the nation of Israel and Canaan after we conquered those tribal states, those horrible, evil, polytheistic people there. Just think about that. You have the Torah, but it's not enforceable. You believe what God says, but the witnesses, you look around you, it's not happening. It's not happening. In conclusion, if he had brought us into the land of Israel and had not built for us the Bet Habakara, or the chosen house, the Bet Mikdash Dayenu, in other words, Temple Mount, the Holy Temple, King Solomon Temple. Now, how important the Mishkan was to the Lord. The tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, menorah, Holy Holies, all of this was so critically important. You know how important it was to King David for to build the temple, and it was revealed finally in King Solomon's time. You know how important it is for God to dwell among his people. There has to be a sacred resting place for God's nefesh, his soul there, to be quantum tangled with every grain of sand around that area. The Shekinah glory manifested and all that. And the whole thing we're waiting for now, the Mashiach is the blueprints to be implemented from the Ezekiel to build the third temple. But Dayenu is enough. So the song, the melody is Da Dayenu, Da Dayenu, Da Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. What if he said it? It would have sufficed us. It would have sufficed us. It would have sufficed us. It would be good enough for me. Even if God did not keep all his promises, I would deal with what I had. I would be so happy. Dayenu. This is 10th century mentality. Folks, what do you think about that? And I'm speaking to Jews here. What do you think about it? It's a nice melody, okay? The Maccabees, 613, all the pop groups out there of Jewish men singing all these melodies. I'm not against tradition. I'm not against a song, but I want you to understand the mentality by rabbinics back then in the 10th century is that they were never planning on the Jews ever taking Israel. In fact, Rosh in the 11th century said essentially, you are not allowed to take Israel, Palestine by force and redeem that land for God, for the people. This mentality essentially led to the status quo, and eventually that led to Jews sitting in Poland and Germany and Lithuania and elsewhere to be murdered by the Nazis. Essentially, it was. Why? Because it was enough. The Messiah, the Mashiach, the prince that Ezekiel talking about, the descendant of King David, did not come in their time. It probably won't come again. There's no need to go and retake the land. Messiah is not here. It's good enough that we stay in these lands and be persecuted, anti-Semitism, Russian pogrom, Russian Catholic, murders and tortures, the Islamic Caliphate and everything else. It's good enough for me, right? I can imagine if I explained that to my daughter or my wife, if I made a solemn promise, so help me God, I made a promise, and everyone heard me making a promise But when it came to showtime, I would say, I'm sorry, you only get this much, but you have this much, it's good enough. How would my reputation be impugned by that? Would people believe anything I have to say? I would be a liar. Dayenu, in my humble opinion, whoever wrote it, and the rabbis that taught it to all their shuls and all that through since the Middle Ages and now today is humanizing God and making God like man. Remember, God is not a man, he's not a son of man, so he would lie. Know what happened in the Middle Ages, know how the rabbis took over the messaging from the Torah, controlled the messaging, and essentially told the Jewish people their message of truth and encouraged them, you cannot understand the Torah unless you understand the Talmud. 75% of my Haggadah, at least, is from the Talmud. I would be better off teaching my daughter the Passover story by reading her Shemot chapter 12. Anyway, this is ben-Emmett signing out until next time. God bless you. Shalom Aleichem.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.